Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The thing about failing spectacularly, Amara thought as she limped through the decontamination corridor, was that you were supposed to feel something about it. Shame, maybe. Anger. The crushing weight of disappointment. She felt tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired, but not disappointed. That probably should have been her first clue that something was wrong. The Galactic Defense Initiative's orbital combat station, which everyone just called the Crucible, because apparently dramatic names were a universal constant, loomed around her like a metal beast. Somewhere in its guts, 300 cadets from 60 different species were celebrating their graduation. Amara could hear them through the walls, a cacophony of chirps, roars, harmonic frequencies, and what might have been interpretive dance. Hard to tell with the Chelrith sometimes. She wasn't celebrating. She was being escorted to holding Area 12, which sounded official and procedural but felt an awful lot like being sent to the principal's office. "Through here, please." The security officer, a Molwyn with too many arms and not enough patience, gestured at a door with 3 of his limbs simultaneously. Impressive multitasking. Amara nodded and stepped through. The door sealed behind her with a hiss that sounded far too final for comfort. The holding area was aggressively beige. Beige walls, beige floor, beige furniture that looked like it had been designed by a committee whose only instruction was, make it inoffensive to all known life forms. There was a window overlooking the training deck below, where she could see other graduates getting their ceremonial phase badges and having their names called out in 17 different languages at once. She'd made it through the trial. 72 hours of absolute chaos designed to break even the toughest species. Zero-gravity combat against AI opponents that learned your patterns and adapted. Extreme temperature zones that went from flash freeze to surface of a star hot. Hostile terrain that shifted and tried to kill you. Psychological warfare that dug into your species' deepest fears and dragged them into the light. Amara had survived all of it, and according to Commander Orsix, she'd failed. The memory was fresh, still stinging like antiseptic on an open wound. She'd stumbled out of the final simulation chamber, muscles screaming, her regulation combat suit torn in 6 places, and there they were, the 3 of them, the holy trinity of terror that had been making cadets cry for the past 18 months. Commander Orsix, the Srakan combat specialist, all scales and cold reptilian eyes that saw through every excuse you'd ever made. Flight Instructor Manic, the Chelrith, whose insectoid features made them impossible to read, and whose standards made diamonds look soft. And Weapons Master Groth, the Lordesh, who stood like a crystalline mountain and spoke approximately once per solar cycle, always to deliver devastating truth. They'd been standing in a row, staring at their datapads. Not at her. At the screens. "Corporal Amara," Orsix had said, his voice flat in that way that meant bad news was coming. "Your trial results have been processed." She'd waited. Water dripped from her hair. Something in her left shoulder was either dislocated or making a really convincing argument that it should be. "You've failed." Just like that. 2 words. 72 hours of not dying. Reduced to 2 words. "Failed," she'd repeated, because her brain was still catching up with her ears. "Your scores are—" Orsix had glanced at Manic, who'd made a clicking sound that might have been agreement, or might have been their species' equivalent of nervous laughter. "Statistically impossible. Outside acceptable parameters." "I don't understand." "You're being placed on administrative hold." pending review. Groth had spoken, which was notable because Groth speaking meant the situation was serious. His voice resonated like struck crystal. You will wait for further instruction. And then they just left, walked away. The three most intimidating beings Amara had ever met, who'd faced down combat veterans and war criminals without blinking, had basically fled the room. That was 6 hours ago. Now she was alone in beige purgatory, watching her fellow cadets celebrate, while she tried to figure out what statistically impossible meant and why it equaled failure. Through the window, she spotted Cadet Rolf, a Duranthian who looked like someone had crossed a bear with a tank and given it anger management issues, receiving his badge. He'd barely made it through the psychological warfare section. Amara had heard him crying in his quarters on day 2. Not judging, the psych section was designed to break you. It had shown Amara every friend she'd ever lost, every mistake she'd ever made, and a highlight reel of her childhood trauma set to music. She'd walked through it like she was grocery shopping. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe she was supposed to be more affected. Maybe. The door opened. Amara turned, expecting the Molwyn security officer again. Instead, she got a medical officer she didn't recognize. Thin, gangly, some species with too many joints in their limbs and eyes that sat at odd angles on their elongated head. "Corporal Amara," the medical officer said, their voice reedy and uncertain. "I need to perform a routine post-trial medical scan." "Already did that, 6 hours ago." "Yes, well, this is a follow-up. Standard procedure. Very standard. Extremely standard." They were holding the medical scanner like it might explode. "If you could just hold still?" Amara stood still, because arguing seemed like more effort than it was worth, and watched as the medical officer waved the scanner over her. Once, twice, 3 times. Then they checked the readout, made a sound like a deflating balloon, and did it again. "Problem?" Amara asked. "No, no problem. Just calibrating. These things, you know how they are. Always need calibrating. So much calibrating." The medical officer was sweating. Amara didn't know their species could sweat, but they were definitely doing something that looked like sweating. "What's going on?" "Nothing. Everything is normal. Completely normal. You're very normal." They backed toward the door, still holding the scanner. "Someone will be with you shortly. Very shortly. Please remain here." And then they were gone, the door sealing again with that same 2 final hiss. Amara stood in the middle of the beige room and did what she'd been doing for 6 hours, she thought. The trial had been rough, no question. The zero-gravity section had been particularly nasty, fighting AI combat drones that moved like angry hornets and hit like freight trains, all while trying not to throw up from the constant tumbling. She'd lost track of how many she'd taken down. Lost track of time, honestly. There'd been a rhythm to it, a pattern she'd found and followed, and when it was done, she'd been surprised to learn it had taken 6 hours. It had felt like 20 minutes. The temperature extremes had been worse, or should have been worse. The briefing had been clear. Each zone would push candidates to their species' absolute limits. Humans could handle a range of temperatures, but the extremes were supposed to hurt. Supposed to require all your training and mental discipline just to survive. Amara remembered the heat zone, the temperature readout climbing, the air shimmering, and she'd just walked through it. Uncomfortable, sure. Sweating, absolutely. But not dying. Not even close to dying. She'd actually caught herself getting bored halfway through and started doing the multiplication tables in her head to stay focused. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe humans were supposed to suffer more. The hostile terrain section had been interesting, at least. Shifting ground, random obstacles, things that tried to crush or impale or drown you. Amara had treated it like a puzzle. Find the pattern, exploit the pattern, survive the pattern. By the end, she'd been predicting the terrain shifts 3 or 4 moves ahead, moving before the ground could catch her. One of the AI overseers had actually stopped attacking at one point. Just stopped. Hovered there in its anti-grav field, watching her. She'd waved at it. It had retreated. That was probably also wrong. The psychological warfare section had been... Actually, she didn't want to think about that one. Not because it had broken her, but because of what it had shown her about herself. All those memories, all that pain laid out like a buffet, and she'd looked at it all, acknowledged it, filed it away, and kept moving. The psych section was supposed to paralyze you with fear or grief or rage. Amara had felt something closer to recognition. Oh, right, that happened. Moving on. Maybe that made her a sociopath. Or maybe it just made her human. She moved to the window, pressing her hands against the transparent aluminum. Below, the ceremony was wrapping up. Commander Orsix was at the podium, saying something inspiring, probably. His mouth was moving. Inspiring things were likely happening. But from here, Amara could see something else. Could see how Orsix kept glancing to the side, toward the observation room above the main deck. Could see how Manic and Groth were standing together near the wall, and how they both looked tense in a way she'd never seen before. And she realized something. They weren't watching the graduates. They were watching the observation room. The room where, presumably, her test scores were being analyzed. Amara's reflection stared back at her from the window. She looked exactly how she felt. Tired, confused, and increasingly annoyed. Her dark hair was still damp from the decontamination shower. Her brown skin had that particular ashen quality that came from pushing your body past every reasonable limit. Her eyes looked the same as they always did. Calm, focused, maybe a little too calm for someone who'd just been told they'd failed the most important trial of their military career. Statistically impossible, she muttered to her reflection. What does that even mean? Her security clearance was still technically active. They'd taken her weapons, her gear, her badge, but they hadn't revoked her system access. Probably an oversight. Probably they'd get around to it. Or maybe, and this was just a thought, maybe she should use it while she still could. There was a terminal in the corner of the room. Basic model. Meant for administrative work. But basic was all she needed. Amara sat down, keyed in her access code, and pulled up the trial records. Her trial records. And that's when things started to get really weird. The timestamps were wrong. According to the official log, she'd been in the zero-gravity section for 6 hours and 33 minutes. But according to the environmental monitoring system, the temperature in that section had been raised to lethal levels after 5 hours. Standard protocol to force candidates to evacuate and move to the next challenge. Except she hadn't evacuated. She'd kept fighting. For another hour and a half, in conditions that should have cooked her alive. The system had logged it as an equipment malfunction. Amara scrolled down. The temperature extreme section. Duration, 9 hours, 16 minutes. Environmental readings showed the heat zone reaching 68 degrees Celsius at its peak. The cold zone had dropped to -45. Standard human survival time at 68 degrees Celsius without protective gear. Approximately 30 minutes before organ failure. Amara had been in there for 9 hours. The system had logged it as sensor error. She kept scrolling, her hands moving faster now, pulling up footage from the trial itself. Grainy video from dozens of angles, time-stamped and coded. There she was, in zero gravity, fighting drones. Moving through them, like water, like she knew where they'd be before they got there. The footage showed her dodging attacks that shouldn't have been dodgeable. Quantum prediction algorithms that the drones used to target based on muscle tension and neural patterns. She was dodging them by full seconds. The video showed a drone approaching from behind, weapon charging. Showed Amara spinning and disabling it 3 full seconds before the weapon finished its charging cycle. She'd reacted to something that hadn't happened yet. "What?" Amara said slowly, to the empty room. "The hell?" More footage. The terrain section. She watched herself move across shifting ground and realized she wasn't reacting to the shifts. She was anticipating them, moving to safe zones before they became safe. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. She was predicting a random number generator. The psychological warfare footage was locked. Eyes only. Command-level clearance. She tried anyway, and got blocked by 3 layers of security she definitely shouldn't attempt to crack. But she'd seen enough. Amara sat back in the chair, staring at the screen, and tried to process what she was looking at. Either the entire simulation had malfunctioned on a catastrophic level. Every sensor, every timer, every monitoring system, or she'd done exactly what the data said she'd done. Survived unsurvivable conditions. Predicted unpredictable attacks. Completed the trial so thoroughly that the systems couldn't process it. Statistically impossible. Outside acceptable parameters. Not because she'd failed. Because she'd succeeded too well. "Oh," Amara said quietly. "Oh, that's bad." That's when the alarms started. Not emergency alarms, not evacuation warnings. Something else. Something she'd heard only once before, during orientation, when they'd explained the security protocols. Anomalous event detected. All personnel to secure stations. Oversight team en route. Somewhere, an automated system had flagged her results, had sent them up the chain of command, had triggered a response from people way above her pay grade. People who wanted to know what, exactly, Corporal Amara was. And the terrifying thing, the really, genuinely terrifying thing, was that she didn't have an answer. Through the window, she could see Commander Orsix, could see him receive some kind of communication, his head snapping up toward the observation room, could see the way his scales rippled, the Shrakan equivalent of a cold shiver. The most dangerous combat instructor in the Galactic Defense Initiative had just been told something that scared him. Amara had a sinking feeling she knew what. Or rather, who. The door to holding area 12 opened. Not the security officer. Not another medical technician. Commander Orsix himself, with Manik and Groth flanking him. They stood in the doorway, 3 beings who'd trained warriors for decades, and they looked at Amara like she was a bomb that might go off. "Corporal," Orsix said carefully, each word measured. "We need to talk." "About how I failed?" "About how," Orsix said slowly. "We don't have words for what you did." And something in his tone made it very clear that this was not a compliment. The 3 instructors entered the holding area like they were approaching a minefield. Slow, deliberate, giving Amara way too much personal space for a conversation that was supposed to be administrative. Manik was making that clicking sound again, the nervous one. Their compound eyes refracted the overhead lighting into 1,000 tiny versions of Amara, all of them looking equally confused. "Sit," Commander Orsix said, gesturing to the beige furniture. "Please." The please was new. Instructors didn't say please. They gave orders, and you followed them. and everyone understood the system. Amara sat, carefully, like sitting wrong might be what finally set off whatever was happening here. The instructors remained standing. Groth moved to the window, his crystalline form catching the light and throwing angular shadows across the room. Manic positioned themselves near the door, not blocking it exactly, but close enough. Orsix stood directly in front of Amara, datapad in hand, and for the first time since she'd met him 18 months ago, he looked uncertain. "Tell me about the trial," he said. "In your own words, what happened?" "You were monitoring it. You know what happened." "Humor me," Amara shrugged. "I went in, completed the objectives, came out, standard procedure. The zero-gravity section, how long did it feel like it took? Maybe 20, 30 minutes? I lost track of time, got into a rhythm with the drones, and it went fast." Orsix and Manic exchanged a glance, some kind of silent communication happening there, some shared concern that Amara wasn't privy to. "It took 6.5 hours, Orsix said flatly. "The readout said that, yeah. Surprised me, too." "You fought continuously for 6.5 hours, in zero gravity, against adaptive combat drones that learn from every engagement." Orsix leaned forward slightly. "You destroyed 83 drones. The previous record was 19. "Okay. Okay," Orsix repeated, like the word was foreign. "You say, okay, like that's normal." "I mean, they kept coming. I kept fighting. What else was I supposed to do?" Groth spoke from his position by the window, his voice resonating through the room. "The drones have a self-preservation protocol. After sustaining critical damage to multiple units, they're programmed to reassess the threat level and adapt tactics." "Right. They got smarter as it went on. I noticed." "No," Groth said. "You misunderstand. After you destroyed the 40th drone, the remaining units attempted to retreat from the combat zone." Amara blinked. "What?" "They ran away," Manic clicked. "From you. The machines we programmed to be fearless calculated that engaging you further was suicide. So they fled." The room went quiet. Amara could hear the IBE ventilation system, the distant sounds of celebration from the graduation deck, the faint hum of Groth's crystalline structure vibrating at some frequency just on the edge of hearing. That can't be right. I'm just human," Orsix finished. "Yes, that's becoming the problem." He tapped his datapad, and a holographic display materialized between them. Numbers. So many numbers. Graphs and charts and data streams that meant nothing to Amara's exhausted brain. Except one number. One temperature reading. 68 degrees Celsius. "The heat zone," she said. "The heat zone," Orsix confirmed. "Sustained exposure. 9 hours. The system flagged it as a sensor malfunction because the alternative was accepting that you survived conditions that should have killed you in under an hour." I felt hot. I was sweating. It wasn't comfortable. It should have been lethal. But it wasn't. "No," Orsix said quietly. "It wasn't. Your core temperature fluctuated, dropped when it needed to drop, rose when it needed to rise. Your oxygen consumption adjusted in real time. Your neural activity—" He trailed off, tapping through more screens. "Your neural activity looked like you were meditating, not fighting for survival." Amara stared at the numbers, trying to make them make sense. "So what? I'm some kind of genetic freak. A mutation?" "We tested for that," Manic said. "Ran your DNA against every known human baseline in the Galactic registry. You're standard. Completely, utterly standard human physiology. Then the equipment malfunctioned." "Across every sensor in the facility?" Orsix shook his head. "Simultaneously, in a way that all points to the same conclusion." "Which is?" The three instructors looked at each other, some decision being made in that silence. Finally, Groth spoke again. The conclusion is that you performed at a level we've only seen twice before in recorded galactic history. Okay, that's good. One of those species, Groth continued, his crystalline face somehow conveying sorrow, was the Renkali. They were persistence predators, unmatched in combat endurance. They could fight for days without rest, adapt to any environment, predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Amara caught the past tense. They went extinct 8,000 cycles ago, wiped themselves out in a planetary civil war that lasted 3 centuries. They couldn't stop fighting. It was in their nature. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The other species, Mannix said softly, we don't speak of. Galactic Council prohibition. Their records are sealed. Why? Because, Orsic said, they scared everyone. Amara stood up, and all 3 instructors tensed. Actually tensed, like she'd pulled a weapon. She held up her hands. I'm just going to pace, if that's allowed, since apparently walking is threatening now. It's not, Orsic started, then stopped. We're not afraid of you. We're afraid of what you represent. Which is? The possibility, Groth said, that humanity has been holding back. That stopped Amara mid-stride. Holding back? You said you did what felt natural, Manic clicked, that you found a rhythm, that it didn't feel difficult. Parts of it were difficult, but not impossible. Well, no, obviously not. I'm standing here. Orsix pulled up another display. The psychological warfare section. Every species has triggers, fears, traumas, weaknesses that the simulation exploits. It's designed to find your breaking point. I remember. You didn't break. According to the monitoring data, you experienced the full psychological assault, every trauma, every fear, perfectly calibrated for human psychology, and your stress markers barely elevated. I don't know what you want me to say. Bad stuff happened in my past. The simulation showed it to me. I acknowledged it and moved on. In 32 minutes. It felt longer. The average time before psychological collapse across all species is 4 hours. The human average is 2 hours. You processed and dismissed your entire psychological profile in 32 minutes, and then stood in the simulation chamber looking, according to the monitoring AI, quote, bored. Amara wanted to argue, wanted to explain that it wasn't that she didn't care. It was just that she'd already lived through all of it once, and living through it again in simulation seemed redundant. Wasteful. She had things to do, a trial to complete, and her trauma wasn't going to stop itself from being traumatic just because she gave it attention. So she'd boxed it up, filed it away, and kept moving. That was normal? That was human, wasn't it? Let me ask you something, Orsic said, his reptilian eyes fixed on her. When you're in combat, real combat, not training, what does it feel like? Amara thought about it. Time slows down. Everything gets clear. I can see patterns, predict movements. It's like music, almost. There's a rhythm to violence. You just have to find it and follow it. The silence that followed was deafening. That, Groth said finally, is not normal. What do you mean it's not normal? Every soldier I've trained with talks about getting in the zone, finding their focus. They find focus, Manic interrupted. They don't predict the future. They don't see patterns in chaos. They don't describe combat as music. It's a metaphor. Is it? The door chimed. All 3 instructors' heads snapped toward it. That, Orsic said quietly, is the oversight team. They're here because the automated monitoring system flagged your results as an anomalous event requiring immediate investigation. Investigation of what? Of you, Corporal. They think you're enhanced, modified, some kind of experiment. He met her eyes. Are you? No. Then we have a problem. Because if you're not modified, if you're just a baseline human performing at this level. Orsix trailed off. Then what? Manic made a sound like wind through hollow reeds. Then every threat assessment we've made about humanity is wrong. The door opened, and 6 beings in oversight uniforms filed in, led by an amphibious creature whose skin glistened with moisture and whose eyes held all the warmth of a tax audit. Corporal Amara, the lead investigator said, voice gurgling slightly through their water-adapted throat. I am Magistrate Dolman. You're being placed under investigative custody pending a full review of your genetic status, enhancement history, and potential threat level to Galactic Defense Initiative operations. Behind them, Amara saw more security, weapons, containment fields being set up. They really thought she was dangerous. And the worst part, the genuinely terrifying part, was that Amara was starting to wonder if they were right. Magistrate Dolman moved into the room like they owned it, which, technically, they probably did now. The oversight team fanned out behind them, scanning equipment already active, reading everything from atmospheric composition to Amara's heart rate, which was, annoyingly, completely calm. She really should be more stressed about this. Genetic samples will be required, Dolman announced, not asking. Full physical workup, neural mapping, enhancement detection protocols, standard procedure for anomalous performance events. She's not enhanced, Commander Orsix said, stepping between Dolman and Amara. We've already verified. You've verified what your limited equipment could detect, Dolman interrupted. We have access to more sophisticated analysis. Military-grade enhancements are becoming increasingly difficult to detect. Black market modifications, genetic tampering, neural augmentation. I'm not augmented, Amara said. I'm just human. Dolman's eyes, all 3 of them, focused on her. Just human. Yes, let's examine that claim. They tapped a control on their wrist, and the holographic display expanded, filling half the room with data. Amara's performance metrics, blown up to impossible scale. 0 gravity combat duration, 6 hours, 33 minutes. Hostiles neutralized, 83. Damage sustained, minimal. Standard human performance in this scenario averages 42 minutes with 12 hostile neutralizations before mandatory evacuation due to exhaustion. Dolman moved through the data like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Environmental extremes, 9 hours, 16 minutes. Survival in conditions exceeding human tolerances by 300%. Explanation, none. Sensor malfunction, Amara tried, across 68 independent monitoring systems, all malfunctioning in the exact same way? Dolman's skin rippled with colors Amara didn't have names for. Probably anger, possibly disbelief. Unlikely. Manic clicked softly. Magistrate, we've trained thousands of soldiers across hundreds of species. We know what enhanced performance looks like. This isn't that. Then what is it, flight instructor? No one had an answer. Dolman pulled up another screen. The most concerning data comes from the hostile terrain section. The simulation uses quantum probability algorithms to generate random obstacle patterns. Unpredictable by design. Impossible to anticipate. Right, Amara said. That's why You anticipated them anyway. Dolman's voice went flat. You moved to safe zones an average of 2.3 seconds before those zones became safe. You avoided obstacles before the quantum algorithm generated them. You, Corporal, appear to have predicted a system designed to be unpredictable. Lucky? For 6 hours. Consistently? With 98% accuracy? Dolman turned to their team. Begin the scanning protocols. I want full genetic sequencing, neural mapping. Wait! Groth's voice cut through the room like struck crystal. Everyone stopped. When Weapons Master Groth spoke, you listened. It was just how the universe worked. He moved from the window, his massive crystalline form catching and scattering light across the walls. Magistrate, before you begin invasive procedures, there's something you should see. I've seen the data. Not all of it. Groth gestured to Orsix, who reluctantly pulled up another file. We conducted a historical analysis, standard protocol when encountering unexplained performance markers. We searched the Galactic Defense Initiative archives for similar cases. And? We found them. Orsix's voice was tight. In human records, going back centuries. The display changed. Text documents, mission reports, military citations, all human, all old. There are stories, Orsix continued, throughout human military history. Soldiers who performed impossible feats. A human soldier who held a position alone against overwhelming odds for 3 days. Another who survived falls that should have been lethal. A pilot who flew 22 hours straight through combat conditions without sleep. War stories, Dolman said dismissively. Every species has legends. These aren't legends. They're documented. Groth pulled up more files. Battle of Thermopylae. 300 soldiers holding off hundreds of thousands. Siege of Leningrad. Humans surviving 900 days of starvation and bombardment. The accounts of soldiers in your First and Second World Wars fighting through injuries that should have incapacitated them. Adrenaline, Dolman said. Psychological factors. Exaggeration. That's what we thought, Manic clicked. Until we found the classified reports. The display shifted again. Files marked with security clearances Amara didn't even know existed. Military documents from a dozen different Earth nations, all stamped with variations of the same warning. Anomalous soldier phenomenon. Eyes only. Every major human conflict, Groth said quietly, has produced individuals who exceeded normal human capabilities by margins that shouldn't be possible. Your militaries noticed. They investigated. And in every case, they found the same thing we found today. Which is? Dolman's voice had lost some of its certainty. No enhancements, no modifications, just humans doing what humans do when pushed to their absolute limits. Amara stared at the files. Names she didn't recognize, faces from conflicts she'd studied in history class, all of them flagged with the same notations. Unexplained performance. Standard biology. No abnormalities detected. You're saying, Dolman said slowly, that humanity has always produced these anomalies? We're saying, Orsix replied, that maybe they're not anomalies. Maybe this is what humans are, and we've been treating them wrong. That's impossible. No species naturally. The alarms cut Dolman off mid-sentence. Different alarms this time. Emergency protocols, station-wide. A voice boomed through the communication system, cold and artificial. Alert, hostile force detected, multiple signatures, origin, unknown. All combat-rated personnel report to stations. This is not a drill. The oversight team scattered immediately, moving with practiced efficiency toward the door. Dolman paused, turning back to Amara. You're confined to this location until nothing, Commander Orsix said, his scales rippling into combat-ready patterns. If there's a genuine threat, we need every capable soldier. That includes her. She's under investigation. She's the best combatant we've ever trained. Orsix's voice rose to a roar. Whatever she is, enhanced or not, she can fight. We need that right now. Another alarm. Closer this time. Impact warnings. Groth moved to the window, looked out at the training deck below. His crystalline form reflected something that made Amara's blood run cold before she even saw it herself. Magistrate, Groth said, his voice somehow conveying urgency despite its crystalline monotone. We have breach. Amara crossed to the window, looked down. The training deck was chaos. Something had torn through the outer hull. She could see the emergency force field struggling to contain the atmosphere loss. And through the breach, shapes were moving. Fast. Too fast to track clearly. But she got impressions. Chitinous armor. Too many limbs. Weapons that looked grown rather than built. And there were dozens of them, pouring through the hole like insects from a disturbed nest. On the deck below, the newly graduated cadets were scrambling, trying to reach weapons lockers, trying to form defensive positions. They looked terrified. They looked young. They looked like they were about to die. Amara felt something shift in her chest. That familiar sensation, the one she got right before combat. Time starting to slow, the world coming into sharp focus, the rhythm beginning to play. I need a weapon, she said quietly. You're not cleared for... Dolmen started. I need a weapon, Amara repeated, turning to face them. Something in her voice must have changed, because Dolmen actually took a step back. Those are my people down there, cadets, who just graduated. They're not ready for whatever that is. Neither are you, Dolmen said. You just completed 72 hours of... I'm fine. And she was. That was the weird part. Should be exhausted. Should barely be able to stand. Instead, she felt focused, alert, ready. The rhythm was getting louder. Orsix made a decision. He pulled his sidearm from his holster, checked the charge, and handed it to Amara. Pulse rifle. Galactic Defense Initiative standard issue. You're rated on these. I am. Then go. Commander, I must protest, Dolmen began. Protest filed and noted, Orsix snapped. Right now, I have hostile unknowns threatening my station and my cadets. I'm using every asset available. That includes her. Groth was already moving toward the door. I'll accompany her. Make sure she doesn't exceed parameters again. You mean, make sure I don't scare you, Amara said, checking the rifle's power cell. Yes, Groth said simply. That too. Manik clicked rapidly. I'm coming as well. If we're doing something monumentally stupid, we should at least do it together. They moved into the corridor as one unit, Amara in the lead, somehow, without anyone officially designating it. Orsix and the instructors flanking her. Behind them, she could hear Dolmen shouting orders to the oversight team. The station shuddered. Another impact. Closer. What are we dealing with? Amara asked as they ran. Unknown species, Orsix said. Not in any registry. The automated defense systems can't even classify them. Weaknesses? Unknown. Tactics? Unknown. Great. My favorite kind of enemy. They reached a main corridor. Below them, through a viewport, Amara could see the training deck. The hostile creatures, whatever they were, had spread out, moving with coordinated precision. Several cadets were down. Others were fighting, but their training was fresh, their movements panicked. One of the creatures moved, and Amara's brain processed the motion before her eyes did. Saw the pattern, the rhythm, the way it telegraphed its attack 3 seconds before executing. They hunt in packs, she said. Coordinated strikes. They probe defenses, look for weak points, then overwhelm them. How do you... Manik started. I can see it. The way they move. There's a pattern. She was already moving down the access ladder, dropping levels toward the deck. Behind her, She heard Orsix curse in his native language, probably something about insane humans, but they followed anyway. The deck access opened, and Amara stepped through into absolute chaos. A creature spotted her immediately, spun toward her with those too many limbs, weapons charging with a sound like tearing metal. Amara raised the pulse rifle, found the rhythm, and fired. The creature dropped before its weapon finished charging. Amara was already moving, tracking the next target, the next pattern in the chaos. Behind her, Groth and Manic took position. Orsix was shouting orders, rallying the scattered cadets into something resembling a defensive line. But Amara wasn't thinking about formations or tactics. She was in the rhythm now, that place where everything made sense, where violence became music and combat became dance. 3 creatures moved in coordination. She saw it, saw how they'd converge, where they'd strike, when they'd attack. She fired 3 times. 3 bodies hit the deck. "Corporal!" Orsix's voice, sharp with alarm. "You're 6!" She spun, dropped to one knee, fired twice. The creature behind her collapsed mid-leap. "How did you... You didn't even look!" Manic clicked frantically. "Didn't need to. I could hear it, feel it." Amara kept moving, kept firing. The rifle felt like an extension of her arms. Every shot landed. Every prediction proved correct. The creatures were adapting. She could see it in their movements, trying to flank her, to overwhelm her with numbers. So she adapted faster. The battle lasted 8 minutes. When it was over, 32 hostile creatures lay dead on the deck. The cadets were safe. The breach was sealed by emergency crews who'd finally arrived, and Amara stood in the center of it all, not even breathing hard. The silence that followed was worse than the combat. Everyone was staring. Cadets from a dozen species, their eyes wide. Instructors who'd seen decades of warfare, frozen in place. Even the creatures, the few still alive and restrained, seemed to regard her with something that looked like fear. Magistrate Dolman approached slowly, stepping carefully around the bodies. Their amphibious skin had gone pale. "What?" they said quietly. "Are you?" "I'm human," Amara said. She lowered the rifle, checked the power cell out of habit. Nearly empty. She'd fired 68 shots, 68 hits. "That's all I've ever been." "No," Dolman said. "No species fights like that naturally. It violates every principle of galactic biology. The energy expenditure alone should have..." "Should have what?" Amara felt something crack in her voice, the exhaustion hitting all at once. "Should have killed me? Should have broken me? I keep hearing what I should be, but no one's asking what I actually am." "Then tell us," Groth said, his crystalline form reflecting the emergency lighting. "Help us understand." Amara looked at them, at the instructors who'd trained her, at the magistrate who'd wanted to dissect her, at the cadets who'd watched her fight. "You're all trying to fit humanity into your framework," she said. "Trying to understand us through your biology, your evolution, your rules. But we're not like you." "Clearly," Dolman muttered, "every warrior species you've encountered evolved to fight other species, predators fighting prey, territorial disputes with neighbors. You evolved for specific conflicts, with specific threats." She gestured around the deck. "Humans evolved fighting ourselves. Not once, not occasionally, constantly, for hundreds of thousands of cycles. Tribe against tribe. Nation against nation. We've been in near-continuous warfare with each other since we could sharpen sticks." Orsix's scales rippled. "That's horrifying." "Maybe. But it's also why we're good at it. We didn't evolve to hunt one type of prey or defend against one type of predator. We evolved to fight the most dangerous, unpredictable, adaptable opponent in our environment. Which was? Manik asked. Other humans. Amara set the rifle down carefully. We're persistence predators, who learn to predict other persistence predators. We're social creatures, who learned to fight social creatures. We're the species that evolved to wage war against perfect copies of ourselves. The deck was silent, except for the hum of damaged systems and the distant sound of repair crews. You're not enhanced, Dolmen said finally. It wasn't a question anymore. No. You're not modified. No. You're just... Dolmen trailed off, searching for words. Human, Amara finished. This is what we are when we stop holding back, when we stop trying to fit into your expectations of what soldiers should be. Dr. Groth spoke, his voice resonating with something that might have been awe or might have been dread. In 3,000 cycles of warfare, I've trained warriors from 200 species. I thought I understood combat. He paused. I was wrong. So what happens now? Amara asked. Orsix and Dolmen exchanged a long look. Now, Orsix said slowly, we redesign the training parameters, for humans specifically. And you, Dolmen added, pass with honors, because we don't have a scoring system that goes high enough to measure what you just did. So I didn't fail? You failed, Orsix said, something that might have been humor in his reptilian features, by being too competent. The system couldn't process it. Neither could we. Amara felt a laugh building in her chest. Exhaustion and relief, and the absolute absurdity of it all. So, I'm the first person to fail a combat trial by being too good at it? Yes, Manik clicked. And we'll be adding a note to every human recruit's file from now on. Recalibrate all parameters. Seriously. Everything. Magistrate Dolmen turned to leave, then paused. Corporal, one more question. Yes? How do you feel right now? After the trial, after this battle? You've been in continuous combat conditions for over 76 hours. Amara considered, checked herself, felt the exhaustion in her muscles, the fatigue in her bones, and underneath it, still present, still steady, the rhythm. Tired, she said honestly, but I could keep going if I needed to. Dolmen's skin rippled through 3 different colors before settling on something that looked like resignation. That, they said quietly, is exactly what terrifies us. They left. The oversight team, the medical crews, the curious onlookers. Eventually, even the instructors departed, leaving Amara alone on the damaged deck with a pile of alien corpses and a rifle she'd used with terrifying efficiency. She walked to the viewport, looked out at the stars. Somewhere in the Galactic Defense Initiative's central archives, a file marked Anomalous Soldiers got updated with a new entry. Somewhere else, a bureaucrat rewrote training protocols with shaking hands. And somewhere very far away, in the classified vaults where the galaxy kept its darkest secrets, someone added a note to humanity's file. Recommend threat reassessment. Previous classifications insufficient. Species demonstrates combat capabilities beyond projected models. Advise caution in all military partnerships. Do not, under any circumstances, make enemies of these people. Corporal Amara, exhausted and victorious, smiled at her reflection in the transparent aluminum. Just human, she thought. Just human was apparently more than enough.